October 14th, 1943. $15,000 FT above Schweinfurt, Germany. The pencil scratched across the worn leather of his logbook as a German fighter pilot recorded what seemed like another routine entry. His 17th heavy bomber destroyed a B-17 Flying Fortress that had just spiraled earthward, trailing black smoke in desperation. Through the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watched the remaining fortresses struggle to maintain formation, their gunners spraying desperate streams of .050 caliber rounds into empty sky where German fighters had been moments before. The mathematics of aerial combat were simple and brutal. German fighters could pick their moment, strike from the sun, and escape before the bomber gunners could effectively respond. Without fighter escorts, the American bombers were nothing more than expensive targets. 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses had crossed into German airspace that morning, attempting to destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. By sunset, 60 would never return to England, with another 17 so badly damaged they would be written off upon landing. The Luftwaffe called it a turkey shoot. The Americans called it Black Thursday, the darkest day in the history of the 8th Air Force. What neither side knew was that this moment of German triumph would be among their last. Within 4 months, everything would change. The German fighter pilots of late 1943 had every reason for confidence. Men like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, older brother of Adolf Hidman Georg Peter Otte, and Major Walter Dahl, had turned the interception of American bombers into a science of destruction. They had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the bomber formation's weaknesses, refined through months of successful combat. The standard American combat box formation, 18 to 21 bombers arranged in a three-dimensional defensive pattern, had been designed on the theory that masked defensive firepower could ward off fighter attacks. Each B-7 bristled with 1350 caliber machine guns, theoretically covering every angle of approach. In practice, German pilots had identified critical weaknesses: blind spots in the nose, limited ammunition supplies, and most importantly, the psychological impact of sustained attacks. Headman Heinz Koche, commanding 5 JG-11, had perfected the head-on attack that exploited the B-17's weakest defensive position. On February 26, 1943, he had shot down his first heavy bomber, a B-24 Liberator named Maisie, and by October had destroyed 16 more. His technique was precise. Approach from 12 Leocal high, dive through the formation at 400 millimol, fire a two-con burst at the cockpit and engines, then break away before the top turret gunners could track. The statistics supported German confidence. During the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission on August 17, 1943, the Luftwaffe had shot down 60 bombers, 16% of the attacking force. American losses were so severe that deep penetration raids were suspended for weeks. When they resumed with the second Schweinfurt raid on October 14th, the results were even more devastating. 77 bombers lost or written off. Over 600 airmen killed or captured in a single day. Major Gashby, group commander of the TU-JG-11, developed the company front attack, 8 FW-1 Ottos approaching line AB Brest, saturating the bomber's defensive fire with multiple simultaneous targets. The psychological impact was devastating. American gunners faced with 8 fighters approaching at a combined closing speed of 600 km/h had seconds to choose targets and often shot at nothing. In their panic, the root of American vulnerability lay in simple physics. No Allied fighter in 1943 had the range to escort bombers deep into Germany. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the primary American escort fighter, had a combat radius of only 325 miles with drop tanks, enough to reach the German border, but no further. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning could fly further, but suffered mechanical problems at high altitude in the European cold, with engines failing and controls freezing. This limitation meant that American bombers flew the most dangerous portion of their missions over the heart of Germany, completely alone. German fighters simply waited beyond the range of Allied escorts, then attacked with concentrated force. Luftwaffe pilots called the point where Allied fighters turned back the golden moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who would claim 206 victories before his death in October 1943, described the tactic in recorded accounts. "We tracked the bomber streams on radar, calculating exactly where their escorts would turn back. The moment the little friends left, we pounced. The bombers knew what was coming. You could see them tighten their formations. The escort limitation created a deadly arithmetics. A B-17 formation might face 4 hours of combat over enemy territory, but only 90 minutes with fighter protection. German fighters could attack, land, refuel, rearm, and attack again while the bombers were still struggling homeward. Some Luftwaffe pilots flew 3 or 4 sorties against a single raid, multiplying their combat effectiveness. The P-51 Mustang's development began not as an American initiative, but as a British request. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation seeking additional P-40 fighters. Instead, North American proposed building an entirely new fighter in just 120 days. The result was the NA-73X, which first flew on October 26, 1940. A remarkable achievement in rapid development. Initially powered by an Allison VR-1510 engine, the early Mustang excelled at low altitude, but struggled above 15,000 psi, precisely where bomber escort was needed. The RAF used these early variants for tactical reconnaissance and ground attack, roles where their exceptional range and low-altitude performance proved valuable. But the transformation that would change the air war came from an unlikely marriage of American and British engineering. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-engined Mustang and immediately recognized its potential. The airframe was superb, aerodynamically cleaner than even the Spitfire. What it needed was a better engine. Harker proposed fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same 2-stage supercharged engine that powered the latest Spitfires. The first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942, and the results were extraordinary. Maximum speed increased from 390 to 440 mph. More importantly, performance above 20,000 FT transformed from marginal to exceptional. The service ceiling jumped from 31,000 to 42,000 FT. The marriage of American mass production capability with British engine technology had created something neither nation could have achieved alone. What made the P-51B truly revolutionary wasn't just its performance, but its range. The secret lay in 3 factors: exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar-flow wing, internal fuel capacity of 184 grays compared to the P-47's 305 jars, but in a much lighter, more efficient airframe, and the ability to carry external drop tanks without severe performance degradation. The laminar-flow wing, designed by North American's Edgar, maintained smooth airflow much further back along its surface than conventional wings. This reduced drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into fuel efficiency. While a P-47 burned 100 gall per hour in cruise flight, a P-51 consumed only 65 gallons at the same speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added to the P-51B in early 1944, combat radius extended to 650 miles. With 108 tanks introduced in March 1944, radius stretched to 850 miles, enough to reach Berlin, engage in combat for 20 minutes, and return to England. No other single-engine fighter in the world could match this combination of range and performance. The 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51BS in November 1943. Based at Boxted in Essex, they were technically part of the 9th Air Force, but were immediately tasked with supporting 8th Air Force strategic bombing missions. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had just days to convert his pilots from P-47s to the new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would later command the 353rd Fighter Group, flew one of the first orientation flights and later recalled, "The moment I lifted off, I knew we had something special. The Mustang handled like a sports car compared to the truck-like Thunderbolt. It was responsive, fast, and most importantly, it could fly forever." The first P-51B combat mission came on December 1, 1943, a fighter sweep over Belgium and France. The first escort mission followed on December 5 to Among, a relatively short-range raid. 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bombers, more as a combat test than a full escort mission. They encountered no enemy fighters, but the mission proved the aircraft's basic suitability for high-altitude escort work. December the 13th brought the first long-range escort mission to Kiel, 490 diameters from base, previously impossible for Allied fighters. The psychological impact on both sides was immediate. German pilots intercepting what they expected to be unescorted bombers over northern Germany were shocked to encounter aggressive American fighters deep in Reich territory. The final week of 1943 saw intensified operations as the 8th Air Force tested the Mustang's capabilities. On December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, claiming 3 German fighters without loss. The Luftwaffe, still adjusting to the new threat, continued using their standard tactics of waiting for escorts to leave. But the escorts weren't leaving. German pilots initially mistook the P-51B for the P-47 at distance, expecting them to turn back at any moment. When the Mustangs continued east past the P-47's maximum range, confusion turned to alarm. Radio chatter intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed German controllers repeatedly asking their pilot to confirm fighter types and positions, unable to believe Allied escorts had reached so far into Germany. Major Klaus Metusch, commanding 3JG-26, recognized the strategic implications immediately after landing from a December 30th interception where Mustangs had pursued his fighters all the way to their landing approach. He reportedly told his pilots, "The air war has fundamentally changed. Our sanctuary no longer exists." March 4th, 1944, 25,000 ft above Brandenburg. Through the scattered clouds below, the sprawling outline of Berlin was clearly visible. The capital of the Reich, the heart of Nazi Germany, the city that Hermann Göring had sworn would never see enemy aircraft. Above it, in perfect formation, flew 660 American heavy bombers, and surrounding them, weaving protective patterns, were scores of single-engine fighters bearing American markings. The first American fighter escort to Berlin represented more than a tactical achievement. It was a psychological demolition of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, had led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 100-meter round trip. The 4th Fighter Group had received their P-51Bs on February 28, 1944, and just 4 days later accomplished what German leadership had deemed impossible. For the Luftwaffe pilots rising to intercept, the sight was incomprehensible. They had been told Allied fighters could never reach Berlin. It was too far, impossible for single-engine aircraft. Yet there they were, fresh and aggressive after flying 500 mauled, while German defenders were the ones running low on fuel after just taking off. The combat that followed was savage. The Luftwaffe committed over 200 fighters to defend Berlin, but they faced not exhausted bomber gunners, but fresh, eager Mustang pilots with altitude advantage and superior aircraft. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 victories. More significantly, numerous German attacks on the bombers were broken up before they could press home. For American pilots, the P-51B represented a revelation in fighter design. Captain Donald Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would become one of the war's top Mustang aces, described his first combat in the type. The Mustang gave us everything we dreamed of: speed to catch any German fighter, maneuverability to dogfight with them, and range to go anywhere the bombers went. The cockpit of a P-51B was cramped but efficiently designed. The pilot sat behind an inline engine that provided excellent forward visibility. Unlike the radial-engined P-47 that blocked much of the forward view, the bubble canopy of the later P-51D would improve visibility further, but even the B model's greenhouse canopy offered good all-around vision. Lieutenant Robert Powell of the 302nd Fighter Group recalled the physical demands. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen above 10,000 FT. Your mouth would be cotton dry from the oxygen, your back aching from the parachute and dinghy pack you sat on, your neck sore from constantly swiving to check for enemy fighters. But we had the capability to do the job, and that made all the difference. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin triggered an immediate crisis in the Luftwaffe High Command. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring initially refused to believe the reports when confronted with proof gun camera footage from German fighters clearly showing P-51s over the capital. He reportedly said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." While this specific quote lacks primary source documentation and may be apocryphal, it captures the shock that German leadership experienced. The tactical implications were devastating. Every assumption about Reich defense had been based on the sanctuary of German airspace beyond escort range. Training fields, assembly areas, and aircraft factories had been located in central Germany, specifically because they were thought safe from fighter attack. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, engage German fighters over Munich, and escort bombers to any target in the Reich. Major Gunther Rohl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, recognized the strategic shift. The Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive, it transformed it. We could no longer choose when and where to fight. They brought the battle to us on their terms whenever they wished. The Luftwaffe attempted various tactical responses. Sturm Group were formed, heavily armed and armored. FW-1 is designed to break through fighter screens and attack bombers at close range. But these lumbering assault fighters were easy prey for nimble Mustangs. The Germans tried mass attacks with entire group attacking simultaneously. But American fighters had the numbers and performance to counter even these. February 20th to 25th, 1944, known as Big Week, demonstrated the transformed dynamics of the air war. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production, with P-51s providing escort throughout. In 6 days, the Americans flew 3,300 bomber sorties and 3,773 fighter sorties, losing 226 bombers, but claiming over 500 German fighters destroyed. More critically, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable pilots. The American strategy had shifted from simply bombing targets to actively seeking aerial combat. General James Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, issued new orders in January 1944. Fighters were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found, rather than staying close to the bombers. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the new aggressive tactics. We'd escort the bombers to the target, but once they dropped, we'd go looking for trouble. We'd dive to the deck, shoot up airfields, catch German fighters landing or taking off. The mathematics of attrition now favored the Allies overwhelmingly. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots. In February, 1,221. In March, 1,115. These losses included many irreplaceable Expert 10 veteran pilots with years of combat experience. American losses, while significant, could be replaced by the massive training programs producing 11,000 new pilots monthly. The P-51 represented more than just extended range. It showcased American industrial and technological superiority. The K-14 computing gun sight, introduced in late 1944, gave Mustang pilots a significant advantage in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated lid based on range and rate of turn, dramatically improving accuracy. The Mustang's 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while less powerful than German cannon, offered advantages in ammunition capacity and rate of fire. A P-51 carried 1,080 rounds total, enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. German fighters armed with cannon typically carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire. In a prolonged dogfight, American pilots could afford to take shots. German pilots couldn't. Major Heinz Behr, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, noted the qualitative difference. The Mustang was not just another fighter. It was a weapons system. Everything about it was optimized for its mission. We had excellent aircraft, but nothing that combined all elements so effectively. Behind the statistics lay human tragedy on an unprecedented scale. Young men on both sides, many barely out of their teens, fought desperate battles 6 mir above the earth in temperatures of minus 50 degrees. The lucky ones died instantly. Others endured horrific burns, traumatic amputations from cannon shells, or slow deaths in parachutes riddled with bullet holes. Lieutenant William Wasner of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and watched its pilot bail out. His parachute opened, but he was on fire. I could see him trying to beat out flames on his flight suit as he descended. There was nothing anyone could do. German pilot Walter Schuck of JG-7 described the changing nature of combat. In 1943, we were knights of the air, jousting with bombers in something approaching fair combat. By 1944, we were being pursued relentlessly. Mustangs would follow us down to our airfields, circle overhead while we tried to land, then attack. There was no safety anywhere. The psychological toll was devastating. Luftwaffe pilots who had been confident in 1943 became increasingly fatalistic. By mid-1944, letters home censored by German authorities but preserved in archives revealed deepening despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above us, always with more fuel, more ammunition." As spring turned to summer in 1944, the Mustangs' range enabled a strategic campaign, that with the German war machine, the systematic destruction of oil production. Synthetic oil plants at Lower, Pulitz, and Brooks, previously beyond escort range, now faced regular precision attacks with full fighter protection. The impact was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production fell from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to 30,000 tons in July and just 10,000 tons in September. Training flights were curtailed, then eliminated entirely. New pilots arrived at combat units with as few as 50 hours total flight time, compared to American pilots with 300 to 400 hours. Obus Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-7, described the crisis. "We had the world's first operational jet fighter, the M262, capable of 540 laminar-flow, but we could barely fuel them for combat missions." I watched helplessly as dozens of these superb aircraft sat idle while Mustangs roamed freely overhead. June 6, 1944, demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over France compared to 14,774 Allied sorties. Only 2 German fighters appeared over the invasion beaches. Mustangs and other Allied fighters had established such dominance that the invasion proceeded under an aerial umbrella virtually unchallenged by German aviation. Oberstleutenant Isef Pips Prill, commanding JG-26, flew one of those 2 sorties with his wingman Unteroffizier Heinz Vodacek. Making a single strafing run along Sword Beach, Prill later described the mission as suicide disguised as duty. They survived only because Allied fighters were too surprised to react to the lone pair of FW-190. The Mustang's role extended beyond escort to active fighter bombing. P-51 pilots became adept at train busting, destroying locomotives with their .50 caliber guns. A single Mustang could carry 2 500 LB bombs or 10 5N rockets, in addition to its guns, making it a formidable ground attack aircraft. Captain Charles Chuck Jagger, who would later break the sound barrier, flew P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Bf-10-9s in a single mission. But he also described the moral complexity. "We went from protecting bombers to attacking anything that moved. We'd strafe trains knowing they might be carrying civilians. It was total war, and the Mustang gave us the capability to take that war anywhere in Germany." Germany's technological response came in the form of revolutionary jet fighters, the Messerschmitt Mi-262 and the rocket-powered Mi-163 Comet. The Mi-2I-2, capable of 540 mph, was nearly 100 mph faster than the P-51D. In the hands of experienced pilots, it could slash through bomber formations and escape before Mustangs could react. Yet, even these technological marvels couldn't reverse the tide. Adolf Galland, flying a Mi-262 with JV-44 in 1945, shot down 7 aircraft but recognized the futility. "We were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves. For every Mi-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs, and Mustangs could loiter over our airfields, attacking jets when they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing." The jet engines of 1944 to 45 were temperamental, requiring careful throttle management and long runways. Mustang pilots learned to exploit these weaknesses. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 3S-61 Fighter Group shot down two Mi-262s on October 7, 1940, by catching them in the landing pattern. The jets, low on fuel and with throttles reduced for landing, were helpless against the diving Mustangs. By early 1945, the arithmetic of air combat had become impossible for Germany. The United States produced 15,886 P-51s during the war, with approximately 8,000 serving in Europe. At peak strength in March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone operated 14 fighter groups equipped primarily with Mustangs, over 1,000 aircraft. Against this, the Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 300 to 400 serviceable fighters on any given day, scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant many never flew. Pilot shortages meant those that did were often manned by teenagers with minimal training. The kill ratios reflected this imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were claiming 10 victories for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, ended the war with 24 aerial victories, all in Mustangs. He observed, "By 1945, it wasn't combat, it was execution. We'd find German airfields, circle overhead, and shoot down anyone who tried to take off or land." The Mustang had made all of Germany a combat zone. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided revealing testimony about the Mustang's impact. General Der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland in his memoirs wrote, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, we had controlled the timing and tempo of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Knoke, who survived the war with 33 victories, was more blunt. The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe. Not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from predators to prey in the span of 3 months. Perhaps most poignant was the testimony of younger pilots who entered combat late in the war. They flew their first missions with minimal training, facing experienced American pilots in superior aircraft. One captured pilot stated, "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944 with 55 hours total flight time. On my third mission, I saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. I knew then that we had lost not just the war, but the sky itself." The Mustang's contribution extended far beyond tactical victories. By enabling deep penetration raids with acceptable losses, it allowed the systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, the Weimar's Achilles heel, was reduced to 10% of requirements by March 1945. The transportation network was shattered, preventing movement of troops, supplies, and raw materials. Aircraft production, though maintained at high levels through dispersal, became meaningless when there was no fuel to fly the planes or trained pilots to man them. General Karl Spaatz, commanding United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, stated, "The P-51 was the decisive weapon system of the European Air War. It made possible the daylight bombing campaign, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic destruction of German military power. Beyond strategic impacts lay profound human transformation. German pilots who had entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged from the war, if they survived, as changed men. Many spoke of specific moments when they realized the war was lost, almost always connected to their first encounter with Mustangs deep over Germany. Some German pilots experienced a different transformation from enemy to admirer. Many Luftwaffe veterans, after witnessing American material superiority and humane Treatment of prisoners questioned everything they had been told about their enemies. The contrast between Nazi propaganda and reality proved devastating to morale and ideology alike. The P-51 represented a watershed in fighter design, influencing aircraft development for decades. Its laminar-flow wing demonstrated the potential for dramatic drag reduction. The integration of British engine technology with American airframe design established a model for international cooperation that would continue through NATO and other alliances. The Mustang's range achievement changed fundamental assumptions about fighter aircraft. Pre-war doctrine held that fighters were short-range point defense weapons. The P-51 proved that fighters could be strategic weapons, capable of projecting power hundreds of miles from base. This concept would influence everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern fighters capable of global deployment with aerial refueling. The final statistics of the Mustang's impact are staggering. Total Mustangs produced 15,486 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat. Europe, 4,150 enemy aircraft destroyed on ground, 4,131 locomotives destroyed, 9,254 combat sorties, over 213,823 combat hours, over 135,420 operational losses, 25 out of 20. The kill-to-loss ratio in air combat exceeded 11.1, unprecedented in aerial warfare. But the true impact can't be measured in statistics alone. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's will to fight, enabled the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by months, if not years. The transformation from German laughter at unescorted bombers to complete aerial impotence occurred with stunning rapidity. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Germany, shooting down bombers at will. By March 1944, Mustangs were escorting bombers to Berlin. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe was combat ineffective. By April 1945, it had ceased to exist as a fighting force. This transformation wasn't gradual, it was catastrophic. The Luftwaffe didn't slowly decline, it collapsed. The appearance of Mustangs deep over Germany triggered a cascade of defeats from which recovery proved impossible. Each lost pilot couldn't be adequately replaced. Each destroyed aircraft reduced training capability. Each successful escort mission emboldened Allied planners to strike deeper, harder, more frequently. German pilot losses tell the story. 1943, 2,967 pilots lost. 1944, 1,237 pilots lost. 1945, January to May, 4,238 pilots lost. Average pilot experience plummeted. 1943, 250-plus flight hours before combat. Early 1944, 150 hours. Late 1944, 80 hours. 1945, 40 to 50 hours. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest achievement was psychological. It shattered the myth of German technological superiority, demonstrated American industrial capability, and proved that democracy could produce better weapons than dictatorship. German pilots who had laughed at American bombers in 1943 were, by 1945, refusing to fly suicide missions against Mustang escorted formations. Young Luftwaffe pilots indoctrinated in Nazi ideology experienced cognitive dissonance when confronting American material superiority. Everything they had been taught about racial superiority, about German technical prowess, about American weakness, was contradicted by the elegant, powerful fighter that dominated their own homeland. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, American and German fighter pilots met at a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. The conversations revealed the lasting impact of the Mustang on both sides. Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and scored 16.25 aerial victories, sat across from Ust Gay, Germany's third highest scoring ace, raised his glass and said, "To the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war, we had excellent aircraft, superb pilots, and were fighting over our homeland. But you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference." Walter Schuck, who had transitioned from FWI-190s to Me-62 jets, added, "We went from laughing at unescorted bombers to taking cover from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military force has ever experienced such a complete reversal." Former Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still bearing scars from his Mi-262 crash in April 1945, reflected, "We laughed at your bombers in 1943 because we could not imagine that America could produce a fighter with the range to escort them to Berlin." The P-51 Mustang taught us the danger of underestimating one's enemies. You ask, when we knew the war was lost. It was that day in March 1944 when we looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. We had already lost. The transformation from German pilots laughing at unescorted American bombers to cowering from Mustang fighters represents one of the most complete reversals in military history. In less than 6 months, from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from dominant to defeated, from predator to prey, from confident to condemned. The P-51 Mustang was the catalyst for this transformation, but it represented something larger: American industrial might, democratic cooperation between allies, and the power of technological innovation driven by necessity rather than ideology. German pilots who had been taught that American democracy made the nation weak discovered instead a society capable of unprecedented unity and production. The laughter of German pilots in October 1943 was based on reasonable assessment of technical limitations. No single-engine fighter had ever demonstrated the range necessary to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. What they failed to anticipate was American problem-solving, capability, the successful marriage of American and British technology, and the industrial capacity to produce thousands of superb fighters in months rather than years. When Mustangs appeared over Berlin on March 4, 1944, the laughter stopped forever. In its place came terrible recognition that everything German pilots had believed about their enemies, their own superiority, and the likely outcome of the war had been wrong. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win the air war, it shattered illusions, destroyed myths, and proved that technological superiority in war comes not from ideology, but from industrial capacity, international cooperation, and democratic innovation. The German pilots who survived never forgot the lesson. In memoirs, interviews, and reunions, they consistently identified the arrival of Mustangs over Germany as the moment they knew the war was lost. Not the invasion of Normandy, not the fall of Berlin, but that moment when American fighters appeared where they couldn't be, escorting bombers to the heart of the Reich with fuel to spare for combat. The P-51 Mustang remains 79 years later the ultimate symbol of American aerial supremacy in World War II. The aircraft that silenced the laughter and ended the Reich's mastery of its own skies. The German pilots who laughed in October 1943 learned by March 1944 that they had laughed too soon. By May 1945, most were no longer alive to regret their premature confidence. In the end, the story teaches the danger of underestimating one's enemies. the power of industrial democracy, and the transformative impact a single weapon system can have on the course of history. The Mustang proved that in modern industrial warfare, courage and skill, while necessary, are not sufficient. Victory belongs to those who can produce the most, train the best, and innovate the fastest. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and devastating. The laughter had become silence, and the P-51 Mustang had written its name across the skies of Europe as the fighter that ended the Luftwaffe's dominance, and with it, Nazi Germany's hopes for victory.